welcome to Data on Data. My name is Ken Buboltz. I'm a product manager of experience and optimization at Expedia Group. I started actually as a revenue management associate analyst with Expedia Group about 5 years ago in Seattle, and this was after my BS in mathematics and global business from the University of Redlands. While I was at Expedia in Seattle, I began my MS in project management from Boston University and actually transferred into a brand called Hotwire in their analytics department, focusing on business analytics, then moving into product analytics before becoming a product manager for hotels.com in London. I do love to travel, naturally, working for Expedia, right? So I visited in my lifetime 34 countries for an average of 1.2 countries per year. So quite a bunch. And living in Europe has allowed me to travel much more than I could have imagined when I moved over here to begin with. But just, the photos to the left there are some of my favorite places that I've been: Mont Saint Michel, Budapest, and I believe that was Riga or Tallinn, Estonia, and then of course my home in the Northwest. And today we'll be chatting about data in the cloud, specifically analytics and analytics. Let me first start by giving you an introduction to Expedia Group. Expedia Group is the conglomeration of multiple brands in the US as well as globally. Some of the brands are here in this image, but included in Expedia Group is Expedia itself, hotels.com, Hotwire, Orbitz, and a number of other high-profile online travel agencies. As a whole, Expedia has more than $12 billion in revenue and 107 billion in gross bookings. This was as of last year, so 2019. Some of the takeaways for what you'll be learning in today's presentation: you'll be learning more about the role of a data product manager versus a platform product manager. You'll also learn more about the value in extracting insights to enable product change, really taking a look at what that product change means and how to leverage it to your advantage, and then looking at the user behavior as well, making sure that product managers understand the user behavior and how to understand exactly what that means when you look at making platform changes. All right, then we'll look at how to drive adoption in terms of platform changes as well. So included in that driving adoption is a little bit of cost management, and then we'll touch on the importance of education with a particular product and or platform. So let's first start by taking a look at the different types of product managers. Naturally, there are going to be many product managers that look at consumer-facing products. So in Expedia's world, I think about a product manager that overlooks, let's say, the shopping funnel, for instance, within the website itself. Other types of consumer-facing products, you can have website components, like I mentioned, or apps. Think of a mobile app product manager. But then we transition and start to take a look at the data products and what these product managers do. And this is exactly what I do as part of my role at Expedia. Some of the things that we look at to try and influence our decisions are the data that go behind the data products. The platforms, the infrastructure as well take a role in data products. But for right now and for this presentation, we'll be focusing more on the data and platforms. When we look at the difference in customers, to try and illustrate this difference a little bit more, an analyst is to a consumer as a data PM is to an analyst and other users. What that means is that while analysts typically look at consumers' behaviors on the website or on the app, a data product manager will actually look at the analyst behavior and other behaviors of the users. This data takes two different forms. There's the metadata piece as well as the platform usage piece. Metadata is typically considered the what, as it were, of what is being accessed on the data platforms. Typically, these are more architecturally focused discussions and or data points that come up, and they explain the patterns of the data that's available to the users of the platform. Essentially, it's taking a look at the content and what is actually available for the users to access. In other words, it is the literal what of what is on the data platform. In terms of platform usage, we're looking at more of the how. So for this, we want to take a look at the user behavior that goes on within the platforms. You also want to take a look at the means of how the user is actually accessing the data or through what tools. And this oftentimes leads to many different types of platform changes that can occur. So this is how I try and evaluate what features are best to have on the platform, right? Or what education needs to be conducted in order to make the best use of the platform. Going back to metadata and what it actually means. In this instance, metadata is akin to what data is used, and it refers to how it's organized and structured, as I mentioned. So here you've got two different types of data structures. Let's say you've got data store 1 and data store 2, and both of those contain a variety of schemas and or tables. This is what data is on the platform. You can also look at it from an architectural standpoint of a pictorial diagram. For instance, you've got a number of different data sources that actually combine to feed into that data platform. And through this, we look at what data is available on, for instance, data source 2 or data source 3. Right? It can be any number of things from a data lake to a CSV or any other type of metadata that would be available on that particular platform. When we look at how the data is used, this is the type of data that I generally take a look at. It's more of a readout on a table, similar to data that would be seen by an analyst on on the app or the website itself. So if you've ever looked at, let's say, Adobe Omniture or any other type of data platform that captures this type of user metric, this is kind of what we look at when we talk about the data that I use to make my decisions on the analytics platforms or data platforms. Right. So in this table, you've got a number of different query IDs or clusters that are being used on the platform, a start time and end time for the query, as well as other things like the username or an alias, the query method, and the query text, for instance. This is just an example of the wide variety of different data types that can be seen by using the data platform. So again, it's that how, right? When we look at the functionality of someone like me, a product manager, we tend to take a look at what improvements can be made to that existing product. What can I do to make this better for the people that use it? In my case, the analysts. Right? Most of this data should be, or most of these product improvements should be data driven. Not all changes, however, are within my domain, and data products, the platform should be driven by that how. So really more of that table-sized piece of information that comes out of it. Unfortunately, not all data decision or all product improvements are data driven. You do have other obstacles that would cause changes in the product, like, for instance, a legal change that is required, for instance. And going back to this, changes within a product manager's domain, a lot of the decisions that I make are not architecturally based. So the decisions are not governing the what, it's governing the how. Metadata changes, just to give a comparison here, they give feeds or leads into how the data architecture is then transformed over time and or the tech stack that might come and back that up. Right, I can advise architects based on the usage and the patterns that I'm seeing of how the data is being accessed to try and govern a little bit of that. And I can also give feedback into someone like a data architect or a data engineer or even a data product manager to say that this is the data that's actually being consumed, and the analysts or users or BI engineers, platform engineers, whoever it might be that's using the platform, they need access to this type of data. When it comes to discussing the how, this user behavior is really driving my platform changes. And I want to make sure that these changes are made in partnership with the platform engineers who actually help to try and mold the platform in the image that makes the most sense for the user, right? In the same way that an analyst would try and guide the consumer-facing product to try and drive more conversions, I want to make sure that the user's satisfaction of the data platform is really what I'm going after here. Sometimes the behavior doesn't actually align with the feedback. Um, and a great example of that is when we conducted an NPS survey a few months ago within Expedia Group to talk about the analytics platforms and how they're being used. So oftentimes the people that speak up, they tend to use the platform most, but sometimes that might not always be the case. Right? If I've got a user that is, querying table after table after table, sometimes they might not be or have the free time to actually give their feedback on an NPS survey. So I really need to take a look at the behavior that the data is telling me that the user is actually doing, right? Another instance of this might be if we take a look at query speed, for instance. A platform might be perceived as being extremely slow, but the data is showing something different. Right? The data is actually showing that the queries are being run relatively fast, that the data is being returned in a timely manner. So what can we do as part of the platform team, essentially, to make changes so that it appears like the data is being returned in a timely manner? This is one of the dashboards that my team and I built in the last few months. And having a dashboard like this really helps to drive adoption of the platform. You can see a number of different components here, including commands by account or commands by type. So in this case, we're looking at Spark, Presto, and Hive commands. Right. We also have commands by user profile and commands by source. This top line helps to articulate more of that usage behavior. So in this particular instance, let's take a look at Spark queries. Right, we can filter on something like this, and it would show a much different picture than the Presto queries. My suspicion here, in just this brief image here, is that Spark queries are traditionally run by engineers, hence why they're comprising almost half of all commands. Engineers in the user profile, that's roughly a third of all commands, which tells me that there are some other queries that are being run that are Spark. Now, they could be run by service accounts, they could be managers, they could be any number of those user profiles, right? But the bulk of those commands are actually being run by engineers. When we took a look at the commands by source and try and compare those to the commands by type and user profile, some of the insights that we extract are that we probably should look at making some changes or look at some education for things like the scheduled jobs that are run or queries that are run via the API. Right? Those are the two biggest components here. So let's really try and understand those pieces that are broken out. And this data all comes from the same table that is of the same format that I showed previously, where it is that how a platform is actually used. Right, if we take a look at the two bottom tables, this is more of the what is being used as opposed to the how. You've got a number of different schemas and tables, right? You've also got a number of users that are querying various components of those schemas and tables. So what specifically is being used from the data? From the looks of things here, you've got one schema or table that has had 14 million commands run against it, and just under 3,000 users query that table. So one of the recommendations that I might give is, well, how can we make this table a little bit lighter in terms of either the data that's being captured, or if we can take a look at the data specifically that the analysts are querying, then we can try and optimize that table and work with the architects to make sure that actually happens. I personally, I love quotes like this. It really helps to drive adoption of my particular platforms, but it also helps to inform my decisions. So there are always some people who have their routines and that they just don't want to change. And that attitude persists as long as the organization permits it. You have to be part of an organization, especially as a product manager, that is conducive to platform changes and data changes. We want to make sure that many of these changes are being adopted, but how do you convince someone to actually adopt the changes that you're pitching? One of the most common tools that I use is using cost as leverage. So to get buy-in, you have to articulate that whatever changes you're going to make, they're going to result in lower costs for the business as a whole. In my case, I typically work with analysts who either need additional education or they could use some query tips about optimizing their queries. But more than that, any type of change that I make on the platform, it has to result in these lower costs. Whether it's an architectural change, so working with those data engineers, or if it's just adding a new feature that would mean query speeds improve by X amount, or an analyst can access the queries more easily or don't have to run as many because they can see in a preview of what they're actually getting in a table, for instance. What I found is that simplistic architectures really do start to pay dividends in the long term. A simplistic architecture means that you've got a number of schemas that are easy to understand. You've got various different components that make it so analysts can really jump into the platform and leverage it to the full capabilities up front. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time with onboarding or additional education there. It's a fairly easy way to go because an analyst, when they look at the platform and start to use the platform, they understand what data is going to be valuable to them. Naturally, faster speeds will yield lower costs in terms of queries. So looking at query times or access to insights or even convenient tools for faster data usage, those are going to be some of the easiest ways to leverage costs as a selling point when making platform changes. Right? And ultimately, what you want is for an analyst to be as optimized as they possibly can, to spend the least amount of time querying data and more time extracting the insights from that data without spending a whole lot of time waiting for something to be completed, right? And when we look at the improved platform behaviors, oftentimes what I've seen is that you've got a number of analysts that have done any number of scheduled jobs, but they tend to not look at those scheduled jobs after they've scheduled them, right? As we're making changes, one of the biggest ways to improve platform adoption and be the catalyst for platform change is to articulate what it would mean if, say, an analyst were to go back and change their scheduled job or their ad hoc query to be more optimized and use less query time. So ultimately, that's less cost to the business. Another piece of driving adoption is that improved education and conducting better product habits, or being a conductor for better product habits. In my line, what we've done is actually created office hours sessions with one of our vendors. We've done a number of different educational courses, which is what you're seeing here on the left. We actually spent a good amount of resources creating an onboarding environment for an analyst to better understand how to use the particular platform that they're using. We want to teach them not all the technical details that they need to know. Ultimately, if they wanted to be in the engineering space, they would have become an engineer. But I found that even if you give them a slight introduction into engineering, that tends to pay dividends in the long run because you've got analysts that are now understanding things like auto scaling and leveraging Spark notebooks to use multiple different types of engines to run their queries. What you want to do is create some quality content to make sure that you're utilizing that product that you've paid a lot of money for its intended purpose. When I was starting off early in my career as a business analyst with a brand called Hotwire, I remember a particular platform that I used to do a lot of different diagramming and specifically business process modeling. And I remember spending endless hours trying to learn this particular platform. And to be honest, I gave up halfway through because I felt like I learned it enough that I could do my job. What I found is that if I had actually taken the time to go back and learn more about the program and used it for the actual purposes that it was intended for, my diagrams would have been a lot clearer, my processes would have been a lot more streamlined, and I would have spent a lot less time trying to figure out how to use the program. In this particular case, what happens is that you want to create an onboarding program or any type of an onboarding course to try and communicate the best and most effective ways to utilize the product so that it costs the business less money and your analysts are happier using the product because they understand it and it's clear to them what they should and should not be doing on the platform. This also has the added benefit of improving, or actually implementing a baseline for product usage. So when we look at product education, we can assume that all people have taken the course, or all the people that have taken the course, have the same level of knowledge. And we can go on to more advanced topics and challenge the vendor or the product manager of that platform to improve it in such a way that it pushes the vendor further, right? We want to make sure that we're always on the forefront. And to do that, what we end up doing is leveraging that baseline to really make sure that the product is solid and it's stable. Because ultimately, what you want is to have a product that is going to be conducive to a seamless working environment, something that analysts, I would say, are happy to work on every day, something that creates the least amount of friction within the environment, and ultimately, as a business owner, something that you can pitch to prospective employees and say, look, our platform, it's world class. And that's what we strive to do within my team. That's what we strive to do with the analysts that work on the platform. We push them to give the feedback to us to make sure that it is a platform worth using and try and understand and leverage their education to the point where they're essentially not only providing us product feedback, but they're providing us a direction with which to go. And ultimately, that right there, that is what the summary of all the data should be giving you in the first place. So if we look at the summaries and outcomes that we've got here, we've got a number of different types of product managers, in particular two that I mentioned with the consumer-facing product and the data-facing product, right? We also have some insights extraction and applications of the data. And what we can do with that, I've shown you on that dashboard, is create the user personas and then really outline the usage patterns. So trying to understand exactly what users are using what data and how they're using it. We also talked a little bit about driving adoption, specifically the cost management piece of things and the criticality of education. We want to make sure that our users are happy. We want to make sure that they're educated, that they know where to get the data. Oftentimes, as you get to be a larger company and a larger organization, what happens is that data is thrown all over the place, right? And unfortunately, this is not something that as a platform product manager we can really control. Saying if you have 20 data lakes, it's relatively difficult to wrangle all of that data into one place. But what we can do is leverage the platform to try and make it more applicable for the analysts, or I should say, easier for the analysts to query that data in whatever lake they end up going to. And this is where that cost management and education piece comes into play. With that, I will wrap up. Thank you so much for your attendance, and I hope that this was beneficial.